When you first dig into the world of VMware, and especially just virtualization in general, you run into some problems or some challenges and just a lot of really confusing information about the processor. And so in this kind of short video here, I want to talk about some processor specifics that you need to watch for just so that you don't get surprised or burned. And let's talk about the host system CPU specifics. Now, if you look at VMware's stated host system requirements, really almost any virtual products host system requirements, you're going to see some things that are somewhat interesting, and you're like, well, what is that and why are they telling me this? This looks like under the hood stuff. Let's talk about that now. First of all, the easy bottom line stuff to understand. For example, with the VMware Workstation, they'll tell you you need a 64-bit x86 architecture CPU that's running at 1.3 gigahertz or faster. No big problem with that. Most of us know exactly what all that means. This x86 part might throw a few people, but for the most part we understand, okay, 64-bit 1.3. Then you start to see this kind of stuff, LAHF/SAHF support in long mode. So the processor has to do that. Well, I would venture to guess that if you ask 100 people on the street whether or not their CPU has LAHF SAHF support in long mode, most of them are going to call security, get away from you as fast as they can. They don't even know they have a CPU. And then even the ones that know what a CPU is probably don't know about this stuff. So exactly what is this? Well, what they're talking about here is the programming and the functionality of the machine language that actually runs on the CPU. Everything that we see on our computer screen is the result of a language that was written at a high level, and then it gets translated into machine level code that gets executed on the CPU. So for virtualization to work, our CPU has to have the capability of managing certain calls and managing the memory on those things. Now I'll just tell you that LAHF means load AH from flags, and SAHF means store AH into flags. So if you ever want to impress a bunch of nerds around the water fountain, or impress the in-laws, this is a great thing to talk about. But just want to let you know what that was. Long mode simply means we're talking about a processor that has 64-bit addressing. What that means is we can address up to 64 bits of RAM memory space, and what that translates to is much more memory can be utilized. Now, if you find this stuff fascinating at all, I've got this website here, and I'm going to try to read it all, just logix.cz. I hope by the time you see this training course that this link will still be good, but that is an actual programming document out there about how to program to the i386 CPU platform. It's some fascinating stuff. If you're a nerd like me and you enjoy reading that stuff, just go out there and look. It's not a John Grisham novel by any stretch, but it's kind of interesting to see what's going on under the hood on these things. Now, the next thing, here are some things to watch for. This is real world. We're not going to talk about LAHF or long mode or anything, but to run a 64-bit guest operating system on your host means that you're going to have one of the following CPUs: an AMD CPU with segment limit support in long mode, or an Intel CPU with VTX support. Now here's the problem. If you ask the nice man or nice woman in your location wherever you buy your PCs, whether it's Walmart, Best Buy, anywhere you go, is it an AMD with segment limit support in long mode? They're probably going to say, oh yeah, sure. And they have no idea what you're talking about. If you ask them about VTX, oh yeah, sure. I mean, it says right here, this thing's fast. You're going to get that kind of stuff. Well, here's the thing. Be careful with this, especially on the Intel side. Now, as of 2009 and even on into 2010, not all Intel processors provide VTX support. And if it doesn't, guess what? You're just in a bad way. It's not going to function on your machine. I have an HP laptop that's fabulous. I love the keyboard. I love the graphics, I love the screen on it, I love everything about it, but guess what? It does not provide VTX support. The thing's only about 2.5 years old. I cannot run virtualization software on it very effectively, and it's just a problem. So be very careful with that. Now, you also may have trouble running virtualization, and you'll get VTX support error messages and stuff, and it may just mean that it's not turned on in the BIOS settings. So you may want to go out there and look at your BIOS and make sure that you have a VTX setting out there that you can turn on. So here's the big question. How do I determine in the real world that VTX is enabled on my machine if I'm having trouble loading a virtualization type arrangement? Well, here's the deal. If you go to VMware.com and put in this, or if you actually, you can put this in anywhere, but if you go to VMware.com and look for Knowledge Base article 1003944, it will take you through steps of how to determine that VTX is properly enabled and in place on your machine. So anyway, here's some real world stuff in this video about how to deal with some of these processor Star Trek type language that you'll see out there. It's all pretty straightforward. The bottom line is, especially if you're buying a new machine, especially a laptop, make sure that you see something about one of these two processors, and especially if it's Intel, VTX support. Otherwise, you're going to have problems with virtualization on those devices.